While trekking through the wild Scottish Highlands, my own son abandoned me with nothing but the cold wind and the threat of wolves. He thought I would never make it out alive and that my inheritance would soon be his. But when he returned to the lodge, expecting victory, he found me waiting for him with a truth that shattered his plan. What happened in those remote hills was not just survival, it was a reckoning between father and son. And the twist that followed changed everything forever. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what you would have done in my place. Now let me take you back to the moment when it all began. The Scottish Highlands have always held a certain mystique in my mind. A place of towering cliffs, rolling mist, and secrets that seem to whisper from the very stones beneath your feet. But I never imagined that my journey there would begin with betrayal in my own home, with words spoken by my only son that would cut deeper than the coldest Highland wind. My name is Elias Ward. I built a life from nothing, brick by brick, scar by scar, after years of service in the military and later through relentless work in the shipyards of New England. I thought discipline, sacrifice, and providing for my family would be enough to hold us together. I was wrong. Adrian Ward, my son, had been born into comfort, though he would never admit it. His mother Helena and I had vowed to give him everything we never had. Where I grew up, with calloused hands and empty pockets, Adrian had every opportunity. The finest school's tutors who came to the house, and later a university education that cost more than my first home. At first I justified it as love. Helena had always believed that our son should be shielded from hardship. When she passed far too soon, I promised her in that final hour that Adrian would never know struggle the way I had. I intended to keep that promise. What I failed to see was that I was shaping him into something neither of us could have imagined. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when the confrontation began. I was in my office above the shipyard, reviewing invoices, the steady rhythm of the rain tapping against the windows. The smell of seawater drifted in, mingling with the faint trace of oil and steel from the yard below. I remember thinking the world felt almost calm for once. Then the door slammed open so violently that the glass in its frame rattled. Adrian strode in, his designer jacket still damp from the storm sneakers squeaking against the old wooden floorboards. His eyes burned with a restless energy I had seen too many times before, usually when he was in trouble. "Dad, I need 10,000. Tonight," he said without preamble. His voice was sharp, not a request but a command, as though I were an employee rather than his father. The pen froze in my hand. I looked at him, this young man I had raised, and for a moment I did not recognize him. "What are you talking about, Adrian? I transferred your allowance last week. That is more than enough to cover your rent." His jaw tightened and he began pacing, fists clenched at his sides. "That barely covers the basics. You think it is enough, but it is not. You have millions locked away and you keep me on a leash like a child. Why should I scrape by when you sit on everything like some dictator?" The words struck me like blows. I straightened in my chair, old habits from the service resurfacing in my posture. "I am not keeping you on a leash. I am trying to teach you responsibility. You are 28 years old, Adrian. It is time you found steady work, learned to stand on your own feet." He laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness. "Work, why should I? When you die, the shipyards will be mine anyway. I will run them better than you ever did." The casual way he spoke of my death left me breathless. For a heartbeat I could not respond. It was not grief or frustration speaking. It was greed, naked and unashamed. My chest tightened, and I felt the years of sacrifice unravel in that single moment. I had spent 2 decades building not only a business but a legacy, believing I was securing a future for my son. Yet here he stood, speaking of my life as nothing more than an obstacle between him and wealth. I saw Helena's face in my mind, her smile, in the old photograph that sat on my desk. What would she have thought of the man our son had become? Would she have blamed me for raising him in shadows of money and comfort instead of strength and integrity? I felt the weight of her absence like never before. Adrian must have noticed the shock on my face because his expression flickered with something like regret, or perhaps fear that he had revealed too much. But just as quickly his features hardened again. Without another word, he spun on his heel and stormed out. The slam of the door echoed like a gunshot. The photograph of Helena rattled against the wall, her smile trembling behind the glass, as though even she disapproved of the words that had been spoken in this room. The silence that followed was unbearable. I sat frozen, the pen still clenched in my hand, my knuckles white. Outside, the rain hammered against the windows, each drop like a reminder of the storm that had just passed through my life. Adrian's car engine roared to life below, then faded into the distance, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next morning, I found myself drawn to that same photograph. Helena's eyes sparkled with a warmth that time could not erase. She held Adrian, only 8 years old then, in her arms at a summer festival by the harbor. He was grinning, his face painted with a pirate's eye-patch wooden sword clutched in his hand. That boy, innocent and full of laughter, seemed like a ghost compared to the man who had stood in this office the night before. As the week went on, memories clawed their way out of the past, demanding to be seen. I pulled out old photo albums, each page a record of the sacrifices I had made. There was Adrian in his private school uniform tuition of $40,000 a year that I had scraped together because Helena believed public schools were not enough. There he was at the university, his dorm fees and expenses paid in full, while I worked nights to keep the shipyards afloat. On his graduation day, I handed him the keys to a brand new car, $18,000 in cash, because he refused anything used. Each photograph was not just a memory, but a ledger of my failures as a father. I had given too much, shielded him too carefully, and in doing so I had carved away the very resilience that life requires. The realization came slowly but settled into my bones like winter cold. I had mistaken providing for parenting. Every check I wrote, every crisis I solved for him had been less about love and more about my own guilt. I had wanted to ease the ache of Helena's absence, to make up for what she could not give. But what I had truly done was buy his dependence piece by piece, until all that remained was entitlement and resentment. Saturday evening found me sitting in Helena's old chair, the one I could never bring myself to remove from the living room. The fabric was worn, carrying the faintest trace of her perfume, even after all these years. I sat there in silence, speaking to the empty room. "I failed you," I whispered. I failed him. The words dissolved into the air unanswered, but the weight of them pressed down on me all the same. By Sunday morning, my resolve had begun to harden. I placed the albums back on the shelf, closed the lid on the memories, and turned instead to my desk. Legal documents lay spread before me, their blank pages, waiting for decisions I had never wanted to make. My hands trembled as I lifted the pen, but I steadied my breathing with the discipline that had carried me through war zones and storms at sea. If Adrian saw me only as a barrier to his inheritance, then I had to consider possibilities I had once thought unthinkable. The phone rang, then startling in the quiet. Adrian's name glowed on the screen. I hesitated, the memory of his words still fresh, but finally answered. His voice came through bright, cheerful, and false. Too bright, too cheerful, the voice of a salesman preparing a pitch. "Dad, how are you doing? Listen, about the other night I was out of line. I want to make it right." The words were smooth, practiced, but I remained silent, letting him fill the space. "Actually, I have a proposal," he continued. "Something that could fix everything between us. Let's take a trip together, just you and me. The Scottish Highlands. Like old times." The suggestion hit me like a sudden gust of wind, knocking the breath from my lungs. Adrian had never shown interest in hiking or wilderness adventures since he was a teenager. Now he was proposing a trip halfway across the world with urgency and enthusiasm that felt rehearsed. He pressed further. "Everything is already paid for. Flights, gear, permits. My friends canceled last minute and the tickets expire tomorrow. It's perfect timing, Dad. Just the two of us, no distractions." My grip on the phone tightened. The urgency felt manufactured, designed to prevent me from thinking too carefully. My instincts screamed caution, but beneath the suspicion was something far more dangerous. Hope. What if he was sincere? What if against all odds he truly wanted to rebuild our bond? The memory of Helena's final wish stirred in my chest the desire for father and son to remain close. Could this be the chance to honor that promise? The silence stretched long as I weighed the possibilities. My eyes drifted to the legal documents still waiting on the desk, their blank spaces filled with decisions I had not yet finalized. The ink had not yet dried, but the future seemed to press against me, demanding a choice. At last I heard myself say, "All right, let's do it." Adrian's voice brightened instantly, too quickly. "Fantastic. I'll send you the flight details. Meet me at the airport tomorrow. You won't regret this, Dad. It's going to be amazing." The line went dead, leaving me staring at the papers spread across the desk. Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle, painting streaks across the window. I looked at the pen still in my hand and felt a chill ripple through me. Was I stepping into reconciliation or into a trap? Either way, the path was set. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of coastal weather that never quite turns to storm but hangs with a damp chill that seeps into your bones. I barely slept, turning over the conversation with Adrian again and again, replaying every word, every inflection, every too bright laugh. Something in his voice had been wrong, too eager, too perfectly rehearsed. Yet the hope lingered stubbornly, whispering that perhaps I was being paranoid. Perhaps this really was his way of trying to repair what had been broken. By mid-morning, the email arrived. Flight details from Boston to Edinburgh. Connection to Inverness then. A short drive to a lodge near a sprawling loch. The message was efficient, almost businesslike, lacking the warmth one might expect from a son inviting his father on a trip of reconciliation. Still, the arrangements were thorough: tickets confirmed, lodging reserved, even permits for certain hiking routes. It was convincing. Almost too convincing. I packed with the precision of habit, folding each article of clothing as though preparing for deployment rather than a vacation. At the last moment, I slipped the legal documents into the inner pocket of my travel bag, folded neatly but heavy with meaning. They were more than paper now. They were protection, a silent acknowledgement of the unease coiled inside me. At the airport, Adrian was waiting by the departure gate, his grin stretched wide, his posture restless. His backpack looked brand new, tags barely removed. He bounced on his heels like a boy about to board a school trip rather than a grown man traveling with his father. "Perfect timing, Dad," he said brightly. "They just called for boarding." "Ready for an adventure?" I studied his face. His eyes darted quickly from me to the gate and back again, a nervous twitch that betrayed his outward confidence. "I am always ready," I replied evenly, though inside the storm clouds of doubt gathered. The first flight passed in a blur of chatter. Adrian spoke rapidly, filling the silence with talk of how fresh the Highland air would be, how incredible the scenery was, how the wilderness had a way of revealing true character. His words seemed drawn from brochures or borrowed from documentaries, not from genuine excitement. He consulted his phone often, as though waiting for messages that never came, and excused himself for long bathroom breaks that stretched into 20 minutes or more. Each time I watched the terminal windows reflect his retreating figure, and each time the knot of suspicion in my chest tightened. When we landed in Scotland, the air was different, crisp sharp, with the scent of pine and peat smoke drifting from unseen hearths. The Highlands stretched before us like something from another world, rolling hills cloaked in mist, jagged peaks rising like ancient guardians, and lochs glimmering darkly beneath shifting clouds. For a moment I almost allowed myself to believe that this could be what Adrian had promised: a chance to reconnect, to find peace in a landscape untouched by time. But the illusion cracked quickly. At a roadside outfitter, Adrian insisted on buying supplies far beyond what we needed. Heavy ropes, industrial-strength locks, signal flares, even a collapsible shovel. The clerk, a weathered man with the rough hands of someone who had spent a lifetime outdoors, raised an eyebrow as Adrian loaded the counter with gear. "Planning to get lost out there?" he asked dryly. "Just want to be prepared," Adrian replied too quickly, his eyes avoiding mine. Later, as I filled the tank of our rented Land Rover at a small gas station, I caught sight of him through the fluorescent-lit window of the convenience store. He had pulled out his phone, hunched over it, voice low and urgent. When he returned, I asked casually, "Everything all right?" He hesitated. "Just checking weather conditions. Storm system moving in, but should clear by morning." I nodded slowly, though I already knew the forecast. I had checked it myself before leaving Boston. Clear skies for the next 3 days. The lie hung in the air between us, unspoken but heavy. We drove on in silence, the road winding deeper into the Highlands. Towering spruce trees pressed close their branches, clawing at the edges of the sky. The sun sank low, painting the mountains in hues of gold and shadow, and for a moment the landscape seemed almost enchanted. But in the passenger seat, Adrian's smile was taut, forced his fingers tapping nervously on the door handle. At last we arrived at the lodge, a rustic building of stone and timber perched at the edge of a vast loch. Its windows glowed with warm light, a welcome beacon against the encroaching night. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and old books. A receptionist with kind eyes checked us in her hands, calloused in a way that suggested she knew far more about the land than her polite smile revealed. "First time in the Highlands?" she asked as she handed over the keys. "For him," I said, nodding toward Adrian. "I have seen plenty of wilderness before." Her gaze lingered on Adrian, assessing, perhaps noticing the way he shifted under her scrutiny. "Be careful out there. The land is beautiful but unforgiving. Stick to the marked trails." Before I could respond, Adrian stepped forward quickly. "We are considering something a little more adventurous. A backcountry route. Tlanach Gorge, maybe?" The woman's expression changed instantly. Concern flickered in her eyes. "That is advanced terrain. Remote. Not a place for casual hikers, especially not this time of year." Adrian smiled too easily. "We will manage. My father is practically a survival expert." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said no more. That night I sat by the fire in the lodge's common room, listening to the crackle of the logs and the murmur of distant conversations. Adrian had retired early, claiming exhaustion, but I could not shake the image of him at the gas station whispering into his phone. Who had he been speaking to? What arrangements had been made? And why did the thought of the remote gorge make my skin crawl with foreboding? In the flickering firelight, Helena's face rose in my memory once more. She had always been able to read people, to see their true intentions. She would have seen through Adrian's false cheer immediately. She would have pressed him, demanded honesty, refused to let him hide behind charm. I had never possessed her gift. Instead, I had blinded myself with hope and excuses. But not this time. The following morning, we met with a ranger named Isla McKenna. She was tall, with the steady confidence of someone who had faced the Highlands at their worst and lived to tell the tale. She spread a map across the table, tracing routes with her finger. "The gorge will take you 30 miles from the nearest station. No signal, no backup. We have seen increased wolf activity in that region, and the cliffs are treacherous. If something goes wrong, evacuation could take days." Her gaze shifted from me to Adrian. "What is your wilderness experience?" Adrian mumbled something vague about camping with friends in college. I answered honestly, describing my military background, my survival training. She nodded slowly, but her doubt remained. "With respect," she said firmly, "this route is not appropriate for beginners. There are safer trails, guided tours even. I strongly advise you reconsider." Adrian leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with something sharp. "We will be fine. My father can handle anything." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more as she handed us liability forms to sign. As I scrawled my name across the paper, a chill settled in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to refuse this path, to demand we take the safer route. But when I looked at Adrian, at the false confidence in his expression, I felt the tug of something deeper. Curiosity. What was he truly planning? What did he expect to happen in those remote hills? When we left the ranger station, the morning sun was struggling to burn away the mist clinging to the valley. The mountains loomed ahead, dark and silent, as though watching us. Adrian climbed into the Land Rover, his smile too sharp, his words too final. "No turning back now, right, Dad?" The phrase lingered in the air, less encouragement than declaration. As the lodge faded behind us and the road narrowed into shadowed forest, I knew we had crossed a threshold. Whatever awaited us in the Highlands, it would not be simple hiking and father-son bonding. It would be something far more dangerous. and deep down I feared I already knew the answer. The road narrowed as we drove deeper into the Highlands, the Land Rover's tires crunching over gravel and patches of frost that lingered in shaded bends. The mist had thickened, curling low across the valleys, clinging to the jagged cliffs as though the land itself were trying to hide its secrets. Trees pressed in on either side, ancient pines whose branches clawed at the gray sky. The further we went, the less the modern world seemed to exist. No cell towers, no villages, no sign of life beyond the occasional stag that lifted its head to watch us pass before melting back into the shadows. Adrian gripped the wheel with both hands, his knuckles pale. At first I thought it was the rough terrain, but then I noticed the small twitch at the corner of his eye, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched as though he were grinding through thoughts too heavy to speak aloud. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, suddenly his voice strained. "Miles from anywhere. Just us." "Beautiful," I agreed, though my tone carried more caution than awe. I had been in landscapes like this before, not in Scotland, but in other corners of the world, where isolation was more enemy than gift. And in every case I had learned one truth: when you strip away civilization, you see people for what they truly are. We stopped once for fuel at a lone roadside station, a weather-beaten hut with one pump and a dimly lit store. While I filled the tank, Adrian slipped inside. Through the grimy glass I watched him again, phone in hand, voice hushed, posture tight. He turned his back to the window, but not quickly enough. The way his shoulders hunched, the way his head dipped close to the phone, it was not casual. It was secretive. When he came out, he smiled as though nothing were amiss. "Forecast still says snow flurries," he said lightly. "Nothing to worry about." I nodded, masking my unease. "Good thing we packed layers." He avoided my eyes. The further we drove, the more the world closed in. Signs of habitation vanished entirely. The road became a narrow track, hemmed in by walls of rock and tangled forest. Ravens circled overhead, their calls echoing harshly through the still air. At one point we passed a weathered sign, half hidden by moss danger, unstable cliffs. "Proceed with caution." Adrian barely slowed. By late afternoon, the sun was sinking low, casting long shadows across the peaks. At mile 23, the road ended in a rough clearing marked by wooden posts that leaned like grave markers. Beyond it stretched nothing but forest and ridgeline. "This is it," Adrian said, parking the Land Rover. "Trail starts here." I stepped out into the chill air. It carried the bite of snow yet to fall sharp enough to sting the lungs. I looked at the packs as we unloaded them. Mine was balanced, every item chosen with care, distributed by weight across decades of habit. Adrian's bulged awkwardly, straps cutting into his shoulders, supplies rattling inside like loose bones. He winced when I adjusted the weight for him. His right shoulder sagged noticeably, as if carrying more than just physical burden. "Old injury," he muttered when he saw me watching. "Nothing serious." I said nothing, but filed the detail away. The trail wound upward through dense spruce, the canopy so thick that daylight dimmed to twilight even before the sun fully set. Moss blanketed fallen logs, and the ground was slick with damp leaves. Every step had to be measured, careful, deliberate. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of our boots, and the occasional drip of water falling from branches overhead. After an hour, we found moose tracks pressed deep into the mud, so large they seemed impossible. A mile later, the cry of an eagle split the air, sharp and wild. And farther still, carried faint on the wind, came the haunting sound of wolves. Not close, not yet, but close enough to stir something primal in the blood. "You hear that?" Adrian asked, his voice tight. "They are 5 miles off, at least," I said calmly. "Wolves travel in packs. They are more wary of us than we are of them." But when I looked at him, I saw no fascination, no respect for the wilderness, only fear. For someone who had insisted on this route, who had pushed so hard for isolation, he seemed genuinely unnerved by its realities. By the third hour, darkness pressed in. We found a clearing beside a stream that cut silver through the earth. The ground was level, the water fresh, the sight lines clear, perfect for a camp. I moved through the motions with practiced ease, hanging food high in a tree, establishing the fire downwind, positioning the tents at a safe distance. Adrian fumbled with the tent poles, lines tangled in his hands like surrender flags. Dad, can you help with this? He asked, frustration rising in his tone. I showed him slowly, methodically, just as I had when he was a boy. For a fleeting moment it felt almost like old times when he used to ask questions out of curiosity rather than calculation. But the illusion could not last. Why insist on this wilderness, if he could not even build a shelter? The question gnawed at me as we ate a simple meal beside the fire, shadows dancing across his face. The night deepened. The temperature dropped swiftly, a reminder that March in the Highlands was no place for the careless. I spoke of past camping trips of Helena, of how she had believed such journeys brought out the best in people. Adrian nodded, but his eyes were distant, unfocused, his attention fixed more on the fire than on me. Tell me about your childhood, he said suddenly. Before the military, before the shipyard. What was it like being poor? The question startled me. Rarely had he shown interest in my past. Yet there was something in his tone, not sympathy, not curiosity exactly, but calculation. Still I answered. I told him of Montana fields of summers spent working farms of hands blistered from labor, of how every coin earned through sweat had shaped my sense of worth. Sounds hard, he said, but his voice was flat, his gaze cold. Lucky for me, I got to skip all that character building. Silence stretched between us. Only the fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. How do you know when someone's lying to you? Body language, voice patterns. Inconsistencies in their story, I answered slowly, watching him. Why? Just curious, he said quickly, but I caught the flicker in his eyes. Not curiosity, something else. Testing me. Later, as we prepared for rest, he offered to take first watch. I want to enjoy this, he said. Listen to the forest. It was uncharacteristic, and my instincts bristled. But fatigue weighed on me, and I let him. Through the thin walls of the tent, I heard him moving around the fire, adding logs, shifting quietly. At first it was ordinary, the rhythm of a camp settling for the night. But gradually the noises changed. Less movement, more stillness. Not the sounds of someone watching, but of someone waiting. Sleep claimed me, despite myself, but unease lingered in my dreams. At dawn I woke to the clatter of metal. Unzipping the tent, I stepped into the chill air, my breath rising in white puffs. Adrian was by the Land Rover, methodically packing gear with an efficiency he had never displayed before. Every item of survival equipment, every food container, every beacon, every weapon, it was all being loaded into the vehicle. What are you doing? I asked. My voice was sharp in the morning stillness. He startled, then straightened, his expression hard. Getting ready to leave. Change of plans. We planned 3 more days, I said evenly. What rush storm is coming? He said quickly. Too quickly. I scanned the sky. Pale blue, stretched overhead, unmarred by clouds. The lie was obvious. Something inside me, long dormant, surged awake. The instincts that had carried me through combat, through chaos, through betrayal. Every fiber of my being screamed the truth. This was not about weather. This was not about hiking. This was something else entirely. Adrian, I said quietly, stepping closer. Talk to me. What is really happening here? For a heartbeat, he held my gaze. Then his mask cracked. Years of resentment, of bitterness, carefully concealed, erupted across his face like a storm breaking. His fists clenched, his jaw twisted, his voice dripped venom. You want to know what is happening? I am done. Done with your control, your manipulation, your judgment. I am taking what should have been mine all along. The words struck like ice. In that moment, the wilderness around us seemed to lean in silent witness to a revelation I had long feared but never admitted. This was no trip of reconciliation. This was a trap, and I had walked straight into it. The air in the clearing was thin and sharp, every breath clouding into white mist. Adrian's words still hung between us like a storm waiting to break. His eyes, once full of practiced charm, now burned with something darker, a bitterness that had been festering for years. I am taking what is mine, he repeated, his voice low but steady, as though he had rehearsed this moment countless times. I stared at him, unable to reconcile the boy I had raised with the man standing before me. Adrian, what are you saying? He laughed, but there was no joy in it. Do not act surprised. You have been holding the reins my whole life. Every dollar, every decision, every step I ever took was dictated by you. You called it responsibility, but it was control. You turned me into a puppet. Well, I am cutting the strings. I took a step forward, my boots crunching in the frost-hardened ground. If you need more money, we could have talked. We could have worked something out. I do not want your scraps anymore, he snapped. His face twisted, years of resentment carved into the lines of his expression. I want everything. The shipyards, the accounts, the house, all of it. And the only thing standing in my way is you. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. You are planning to leave me here, I said finally. The words felt like ash on my tongue. Adrian's smile was cold, devoid of any trace of the son I once knew. Very good. Yes, I am leaving you here. 30 miles from the nearest soul, no food, no water, no gear. Maybe you will survive, maybe you will not. Either way, by the time anyone finds you, I will have what I deserve. Adrian, please. My throat was raw, the word tearing out of me more like a plea than a command. Whatever I did wrong, we can fix it. Do not do this. For the briefest moment, something flickered across his face. Hesitation, doubt, perhaps the ghost of the boy who used to grip my hand during thunderstorms. But just as quickly it vanished. His features hardened into something unrecognizable. Goodbye, Dad, he said. Try not to meet the wolves too quickly. I want you to have time to think about what you created. He slammed the Land Rover's tailgate shut and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life loud in the still morning air. I stepped forward, desperate to stop him, but he threw the vehicle into reverse tires, spitting gravel. Through the windshield I saw his face one last time, cold, calculated, devoid of anything resembling filial love. Adrian. I shouted, my voice echoing against the cliffs. But he was gone. The Land Rover disappeared around the bend, its growl fading into the distance until only silence remained. I stood alone on the dirt road, the reality pressing in like a vice. 30 miles from the nearest human being, abandoned in the heart of the Highlands, with nothing but the clothes on my back. The dust from the vehicle still hung in the air, mingling with the thin morning light. When it settled, there was nothing. No sound but the whisper of wind through the pines, the distant cry of a raven circling high above. Shock threatened to crush me, but I forced it down. Shock was a luxury I could not afford. Military training surged to the surface, instinct overriding despair. First rule: assess resources. I patted my pockets. Wallet, house keys, a small folding knife I had forgotten to remove from my jacket. No food, no water, no compass, no gear, nothing else. Second rule: evaluate environment. March in the Highlands meant freezing nights, unpredictable weather terrain that could break even the strongest traveler. Wolves had been close the night before, their howls carrying across the valleys. Cliffs lined the gorge ahead, treacherous and unforgiving. Third rule: prioritize survival. Shelter, water, navigation. In that order, I turned slowly, scanning the land. The gorge stretched east, deeper into wilderness. To the west, somewhere far beyond ridges and forests, lay the main road we had left behind. I remembered Isla McKenna's words, 30 miles from the nearest station. That meant days of travel on foot through hostile terrain without supplies. But standing still meant death. I took my first step west, following the faint tracks the Land Rover had left. Within 100 yards, I saw a narrow trail breaking from the road, an animal track cutting through the underbrush. Game trails always led to water. Water meant life. And perhaps, just perhaps, it meant rescue. The forest closed around me like a living tunnel. Massive spruces rose overhead, blotting out much of the light. Moss hung heavy from the branches, dripping cold water down the back of my neck, Every sound was amplified, the snap of twigs beneath my boots, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distant beat of wings overhead. I broke branches as I walked, leaving crude trail markers. It was an old habit, one that had saved lives in jungles and deserts long ago. Here it was a thread of hope, however thin, that someone might follow. Signs of predators appeared quickly. Claw marks raked deep into bark, some fresh enough that sap still oozed. Massive paw prints pressed into the mud larger than my hand. Droppings scattered in the underbrush, steaming faintly in the morning chill. The bears of these lands were not as legendary as those in Alaska, but they were no less dangerous. I made noise as I moved, humming low, then calling out in steady intervals. Better to announce myself than stumble upon something that would see me as prey. Hours passed. My throat grew parched, lips cracked from the cold air. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but thirst was the greater enemy. The animal trail twisted and meandered, sometimes vanishing completely, forcing me to backtrack and search for the next sign. My knees ached from uneven ground. My breath came in ragged bursts, but I pressed on. Then, faint at first, I heard it. A sound that did not belong. Mechanical. Rhythmic. Engines. I froze, every nerve alive. It came from the north, half a mile perhaps. Not the low growl of a car on a road, but the sharper whine of ATVs or motorbikes. Human-made. Deliberate. Hope surged like fire in my chest. I angled toward the sound, crashing through the undergrowth, ignoring the scratches tearing at my hands and face. The engines grew louder, closer, until I broke through the tree line and stumbled into a clearing. 4 riders sat astride ATVs' helmets, resting on handlebars as they unpacked food from saddlebags. Their heads snapped up in shock at my sudden appearance. I must have looked wild, clothes torn, face streaked with mud, eyes blazing with desperation. The leader, a bearded man with weathered features, rose quickly. Concern replaced surprise. "Sir, what happened? Why are you out here alone?" I staggered forward, my voice hoarse from thirst and strain. "My son, he left me. Took the vehicle, all the gear, left me to die." Their faces darkened with horror. The woman among them, younger but strong, handed me a bottle of water. I drank greedily, the liquid burning down my dry throat. "That is attempted murder," the bearded man said grimly. "Name's Callum Fraser. Used to be a ranger here, and you are telling me your own son abandoned you?" I nodded weakly. "Elias Ward. My son Adrian. He planned it. Said he wanted what was mine. Drove off, left me with nothing." Callum exchanged glances with his companions. "We cannot leave you here. Radio range is limited, but there is a shortcut. Old Ranger Trail through the backcountry. We can have you back at the lodge in under 2 hours. Faster than your son could ever return by road." His words hit me like lightning. Faster than my son. That meant I could be waiting when Adrian arrived, expecting to find his father dead or dying. Instead, he would find me alive, and I would have witnesses. I clenched the water bottle, feeling strength seep back into me. Adrian had calculated my death with precision, but he had made one fatal mistake. He underestimated me. He underestimated the land. And he underestimated the people who still valued honor and survival. "I want to get back before him," I said, my voice low but steady. "Before he even knows what happened." Callum nodded, his expression grim but approving. "Then climb on. We will get you there. And when he walks through that door, you will be ready." I swung onto the back of his ATV, the engine roaring beneath us, and as we sped into the forest, I felt something inside me shift. The helplessness of the morning was gone, replaced by something sharper, colder. Resolve. Adrian thought he had written the ending of this story, but it was my hand that would hold the final pen, and when he returned to the lodge, he would discover just how wrong he had been. The roar of the ATV tore through the silence of the Highlands as we cut across hidden trails few outsiders ever saw. The machine bucked and jolted beneath us, splattering mud across my boots, but I gripped the frame with steady hands. My eyes scanned the land as it blurred past ridges, veiled in mist-skeletal branches clawing at the sky, ravens scattering at our approach. Each jolt of the engine was a reminder that I was no longer a man abandoned and helpless. I was a man with purpose. Callum Fraser leaned forward over the handlebars, his posture confident, every twist of the path navigated with the ease of long familiarity. This way, he shouted over the roar, "It will shave hours off the return." Behind us, the other riders followed in formation, their headlights cutting sharp beams through the fog. These were not thrill seekers, but seasoned outdoorsmen, people who respected the Highlands and understood its dangers. Already I felt safer with them than I had with my own blood. After nearly an hour, we reached a ridge that overlooked the valley. The forest stretched in every direction, vast and endless, but in the distance I glimpsed the faint outline of the lodge, its chimneys sending thin trails of smoke into the evening air. Relief struck me sharp and unexpected, but it was tempered by a darker realization. Somewhere on winding roads miles away, Adrian was driving the Land Rover back toward that same lodge. He believed me gone reduced to bones and memory. He believed his plan had worked. He had no idea I was already waiting for him. We descended the ridge, the trail twisting sharply, and finally emerged onto a paved road. The transition felt jarring, like stepping from one world into another. Civilization was suddenly close again. Callum slowed, pulling up beside me as we coasted toward the lodge. "You want to go straight to the police?" he asked, his voice steady, though his eyes studied me carefully. I considered it the weight of the decision pressing down like the Highland sky. To hand Adrian over immediately would be simple. Clean, justice served. But it would also mean he never truly understood the gravity of what he had done. He would spin his lies, claim innocence, paint me as delusional or mistaken. No. I needed him to reveal himself, to stand exposed before undeniable truth. "Not yet," I said finally. "When he returns, I want him to see me. I want him to know he failed. And I want his words on record." Callum nodded slowly. "Then we will make sure of it." When we arrived at the lodge, twilight had settled. The windows glowed warmly, casting golden light onto the damp earth. From the parking area, I scanned for the Land Rover. Empty. Adrian had not yet returned. Time was on my side. Inside, the receptionist glanced up in surprise at my muddy, battered appearance. Before she could ask questions, Callum leaned in, his tone firm but polite. "We need an additional room, adjacent to this gentleman's, tonight." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. Perhaps she had seen enough strange dramas play out in the Highlands not to press further. Keys were exchanged, arrangements made. In the quiet of my room, I spread my documents across the desk. The will I had revised weeks earlier lay there, the ink bold, the language final. Adrian would inherit nothing. Everything would go to charities, to foundations, to causes that carried Helena's name. Looking at the pages, I felt a grim satisfaction. His greed had led him to attempt patricide, but in the end his inheritance would vanish into the very ideals he despised: discipline, sacrifice, service to others. But documents alone would not be enough. I needed proof, evidence. A soft knock at the connecting door announced Callum. He stepped in carrying a camera bag and a tripod. "I have equipment," he said. "We can record everything audio-video. When he walks in, whatever he says will be preserved." The others followed briefly, offering contact details and their promise to testify if needed. Then they departed, leaving Callum and me alone. He set up the camera in the adjoining room, positioning it so that the lens pointed through the narrow crack in the connecting door. From that vantage point, it would capture the entire desk, the legal papers, and Adrian's face when he saw me alive. "What happens when we hand this over to authorities?" I asked quietly. "Attempted murder," Callum replied without hesitation. "The courts here take abandonment seriously, especially deliberate abandonment in wilderness. He will be facing decades." I nodded. The weight of it was heavy, but it was not mine to carry. Adrian had chosen this path. By 8 o'clock, everything was ready. I showered, changed into clean clothes, and sat in the chair facing the door. The desk lamp cast a pool of light across the papers, highlighting the sharp black letters. Beyond the window, the Highlands were swallowed by darkness. The world outside was silent, waiting. At 8:30, Callum slipped into his room, leaving the connecting door slightly ajar. I could hear the faint click of his camera adjusting, the quiet hum of recording equipment coming to life. We waited. Time crawled. I listened to the steady tick of the clock on the wall, each second stretching into eternity. My heartbeat matched its steady but unyielding. I thought of Helena then, her laughter, her warmth, her endless hope for our son. What would she have thought if she could see him now? Would she have blamed me as I blamed myself? Or would she have seen, as I was beginning to, that this was not simply the result of my failures, but of choices Adrian himself had made? At 8:47, headlights swept across the parking lot. I rose slowly, moving to the window. The distinctive rumble of the Land Rover's engine carried through the night. My son had returned. The vehicle pulled up outside its headlights, cutting sharp beams into the fog. For a moment I imagined him rehearsing his act, ready to call the police, ready to shed false tears about his poor father who never came back. He believed his story already written, but tonight he would learn otherwise. I moved back to the chair, settling into it, hands folded on the desk. The papers lay before me, waiting. From the adjoining room I heard the faint shift of Callum adjusting his equipment. The trap was set. The door handle rattled, then scraped as a key slid into the lock. Twice it caught before turning. The door swung open with a soft creak. Adrian stepped inside his posture, cautious as though expecting emptiness. He froze when his eyes fell on me. I sat there calmly, illuminated by the lamp, Helena's photograph behind me on the shelf, the legal papers spread out like weapons. His mouth opened, but no words came. His face cycled through disbelief, shock, and something perilously close to terror. "Hello, Adrian," I said evenly. "How was your drive?" The door hung, half open, the silence inside the lodge stretching taut as a bowstring. Adrian stood frozen on the threshold, his breath caught somewhere between disbelief and dread. The firelight from the common hearth flickered faintly down the corridor behind him, casting long shadows across his face. He had expected an empty room. He had expected victory. Instead, he found me waiting. "Hello, Adrian," I said again, my voice steady, unhurried, every syllable measured. "How was your drive?" His lips moved soundlessly, the shock written plain across his features. Finally, he managed a hoarse whisper. You are alive." I leaned back slightly in the chair, folding my hands atop the papers on the desk, very observant. Disappointed, he stepped inside, slowly closing the door behind him with a trembling hand. His eyes darted around the room, searching, calculating, perhaps wondering if this was a trick. The lamplight glinted off his damp hair, the collar of his jacket still frosted with mist. How did you, he began, but the words faltered, swallowed by the weight of the silence between us. I walked, I interrupted softly, through the forest, through the gorge, through every mile you thought would break me, and yet here I sit. His expression twisted confusion, bleeding into frustration. "That is impossible. You could not have. You underestimated me," I cut in. My tone sharpened, no longer soft but steel-edged, "just as you always have. You thought money was survival. You thought comfort was strength. You believed I had grown soft, complacent. But Adrian, I was forged in places far harsher than these highlands. You forgot who raised you." He recoiled slightly, his back brushing the door. "You are twisting this. You do not understand." "Then explain," I said, gesturing toward the empty chair across from me. "Sit. Tell me why your father's death seemed like a reasonable solution." For a long moment he hovered there, torn between fight and flight. Then with a nervous exhale he stepped forward and lowered himself into the chair. His fingers drummed against his knees, his eyes refusing to meet mine. "You never trusted me," he said at last, his voice low, bitter. "You gave me everything but freedom. You made me dependent and then despised me for it. Every choice I made you hovered. Every mistake you cleaned up, reminding me afterward how much I owed you. I was never your son, I was your project." His words were sharp-cutting, but I forced myself to remain still. "And so your answer was to kill me. I was not going to do it myself," he snapped, anger flaring in his tone. "I thought..." Maybe the wilderness would finish the job for me. Wolves, cliffs, exposure, an accident clean and simple. No blood on my hands. Just freedom. He ran a hand across his face, his mask slipping further. I thought once you were gone, everything would be mine. Finally, I would be free of your judgment. Free to live without being chained to your legacy. My chest ached with a pain deeper than any wound I had known. I saw not only the man before me, but also the boy he once was laughing by Helena's side, dreaming of adventures. How had it come to this? You think this is freedom? I asked quietly. Plotting your father's death, becoming a murderer for money. His head snapped up, eyes blazing. Do not. You dare lecture me. You made me this way. You and your endless discipline, your constant demands, your impossible standards. I never asked to be part of your empire. I never asked to live in your shadow. This, he gestured wildly, is all your fault. The words erupted like thunder, raw and venomous, reverberating through the room. Yet beneath the fury, I saw it, the trembling in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his forehead. This was not strength. This was desperation. Slowly, I slid the top document across the desk. Do you know what this is? His eyes flicked downward. The will, his name absent, his inheritance erased, his face drained of color. No, he whispered. No, you would not. I did, I said firmly. Before this trip, before your plan, I changed everything. You inherit nothing. Not a cent. Not a brick. It all goes to causes your mother believed in. Scholarships, charities, conservation. You tried to kill me for something that was never yours. His breath came fast, ragged. You cannot do that. I am your son. Your blood. I met his eyes unflinching. Blood is earned, Adrian, not given. And tonight you proved to me that whatever you are no son of mine. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Adrian slumped back his shoulders, sagging, the fight draining from him. Then, like a drowning man lashing out in final desperation, he leaned forward, his voice breaking. You cannot abandon me, please. You do not know what it is like living under you. Always second, always small. I wanted to matter. For a heartbeat pity pierced my anger. I saw the frightened child he once was, terrified of being overlooked, desperate for approval. But pity could not erase what he had done. From the adjoining room there was a faint click. Callum's camera captured every word, every admission, every accusation. I rose slowly, the chair creaking behind me. You wanted to matter, and now you will. In the record, in the court, as a man who chose greed over love, as a son who betrayed his father. Adrian's eyes widened. You are recording this. Before I could answer, the door burst open. Callum stepped through his face, grim camera still rolling. We have enough, he said flatly. More than enough. Adrian shot to his feet, his face pale as death. No, you cannot. This is entrapment. This is your own voice, Callum cut him off. Your own words. No one forced them from you. Adrian's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. He looked at me, eyes wild as though begging for rescue. Dad, please, do not let them take me. You can fix this. You always fix everything. I shook my head slowly. Not this time. As if summoned by fate, there was a sharp knock at the outer door. The receptionist entered with 2 uniformed officers at her side, their expressions solemn. Callum had alerted them earlier, ensuring they would be ready when the time came. Adrian backed away, hands raised as though warding off a blow. You cannot do this to me. I am your son. I looked at him one last time. You were my son. Once. But that man is gone. The officers stepped forward, cuffing his wrists. He struggled briefly, his voice breaking into incoherent pleas, but it was over. They led him out into the night, his protests fading down the corridor. The room fell silent again, save for the crackle of the fire in the hearth. I stood alone, staring at the will spread across the desk, the ink gleaming under the lamp. For the first time in years, I felt a strange calm settle over me. But beneath the calm, grief lingered sharp and unrelenting. My son had tried to kill me. My son had become a stranger. And though justice had begun, the true reckoning was only starting for both of us. I turned to Callum, who was packing away the camera. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded, his expression softening. "Justice is a hard road, but you are not walking it alone." Outside, the Highland night stretched endless and dark, the mist rolling in heavy waves across the loch. Somewhere beyond, wolves howled their voices, rising like mournful echoes. The wilderness had revealed the truth. Now the world of men would have its turn. And as I stood in the dim light of the lodge, I knew the next chapter was about to begin. The sound of the police car faded into the night, its headlights swallowed by the mist, rolling across the Highland road. Silence settled back over the lodge, broken only by the low crackle of the fire and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I sat in the chair where Adrian had faced me moments before, the papers of my will still spread across the desk. The lamp cast its steady glow, but the room felt emptier, now stripped of the storm that had raged only minutes earlier. For the first time since stepping into this cursed trip, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. My son had been stopped. His plan had failed. Justice was already moving into place. Yet the victory brought no joy. Only a hollow ache where love used to be. Callum stepped back into the room, his boots leaving faint prints on the wooden floor. He had been with the officers as they led Adrian away, making sure nothing was overlooked. Now he set the camera on the desk, his expression calm but heavy. "It is done," he said quietly. I nodded. "Yes, it is done." But inside, a voice whispered that nothing was truly finished. This was not just about arrest or evidence. This was about a life shattered from within, about the death of something far greater than a plan of betrayal. It was about the death of the bond between father and son. The following morning was clear and sharp, the Highlands gleaming under pale sunlight. The mist had lifted, revealing ridges that seemed to stretch forever. I stood by the window looking out over the loch, the reflection of the sky broken by ripples of wind. For years I had thought of the future as something to guard, to hand down, to protect for my son. Now that vision was gone. The officers returned briefly, papers in hand, asking me to provide a full account. I told them everything. The confrontation at the shipyard, the sudden invitation, the suspicious gear, the abandonment, the rescue. My voice was steady, though every detail felt like reopening a wound. Callum provided his footage and promised to testify. The officers assured me the case was strong. Attempted murder, reckless endangerment, fraud. Adrian would not walk away from this unscathed. When they left, I returned to the desk. I picked up the photograph of Helena, her smile frozen in time, her eyes filled with the hope I had once carried so easily. "I tried," I whispered. "I tried to give him everything. Maybe I gave too much. Maybe I gave it the wrong way. But this is not what you wanted for him." I set the photo down gently, then gathered the will into its folder. The ink on those pages now felt heavier than any weapon. They would carry forward not the greed of my son, but the legacy of my wife. Scholarships for children like Adrian once was bright but vulnerable. Grants for veterans who, like me, struggled to rebuild their lives after service. Conservation funds to protect the land that had revealed the truth so harshly. For the first time in decades, I felt that my work would matter beyond my family. Beyond blood, the days that followed blurred into routine. Statements given, documents signed, arrangements made for my return to the States. Adrian's name appeared in headlines across local papers, his betrayal painted stark against the wild backdrop of the Highlands. The world knew him now not as an heir, but as a criminal. One evening before I left Scotland, a letter arrived. Handwritten, shaky. From Adrian. "Dad," it began. "I am sorry. I lost control. I was angry, desperate. I never meant for it to go so far. Please, I am your son. Please do not let them take everything from me. Please do not cut me off." The words dripped with manipulation. Even in apology, he begged not for forgiveness, but for money, for inheritance, for rescue. He had not changed. He had not understood. I folded the letter once, then tore it down the middle. The pieces fluttered into the fire, curling into ash before disappearing into the flames. There was no going back. On my final day in the Highlands, I walked alone to the edge of the loch. The air was cool, the sky streaked with crimson as the sun dipped behind the hills. I thought of the wolves that had howled in the distance the night Adrian left me. In their wildness, they had been honest. They killed to live, to survive, not to betray. It was men, not wolves, who invented cruelty out of greed. As the water lapped softly against the stones at my feet, I whispered a final farewell to Helena. I failed him, but I will not fail others. Your name will live on not through his greed, but through what good can still be done. When I left Scotland the next morning, I carried no joy, no triumph, only clarity. Adrian would face the justice of man. I would face the justice of my own conscience. And though the bond between us was gone, I had found a purpose stronger than blood. This story is not just about betrayal. It is about the choices we make and the consequences they bring. Elias gave his son everything, but in shielding him from hardship, he took away the lessons that hardship teaches. Adrian chose greed and manipulation, and in doing so destroyed the bond that should have been unbreakable. In the end, survival was not just about outlasting the wilderness. It was about facing the truth, accepting loss, and finding strength in a new path forward. The lesson is clear. Love cannot exist without respect. Legacy cannot exist without responsibility. And family, no matter how strong, can be broken when greed replaces gratitude. If this story moved you, if it made you think about family choices or the cost of betrayal, please like this video, share it with others, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal the hidden truths of human nature.